Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. This is my story, one I never thought I'd share, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it. What happened to me changed everything I believed in about love, trust, and betrayal. So here it goes. The words still echo in my head, sharp and stinging like a fresh slap. You're being controlling, Mark. Just because Leo doesn't have your exact nose doesn't mean you get to interrogate me. Isabella, my wife, had spat them out, her eyes flashing with an anger I hadn't seen since, well, ever, really. We were standing in the nursery, the pale yellow walls meant to be soothing, the mobile of fluffy sheep spinning lazily above the crib. But nothing felt soothing. Little Leo, all of 2 months old, was asleep in that crib, and the sight of him, so peaceful, so innocent, just twisted the knot in my stomach tighter. It wasn't just his nose. It was his eyes, a startling shade of blue that had no precedent in my family tree, which was a gallery of brown and hazel. It was his hair, a wisp of fiery red that stood out against my own dark brown and Isabella's blonde. Small things, maybe. Things other people who weren't me, might dismiss. But they were piling up, these little genetic anomalies, forming a mountain of doubt I couldn't ignore, no matter how much Isabella tried to shame me into silence. Controlling me. After everything. It was a masterstroke of deflection, I give her that. It made me second-guess myself, just for a moment. Was I being paranoid? Was the stress of new fatherhood manifesting as suspicion? But then I'd look at Leo again, this tiny human who was supposed to be a miniature version of us, a blend of our love, and the cold unease would wash over me again. Isabella and I met in college, a cliché, I know. She was an art history major, all flowing scarves and intense gazes, passionate about Renaissance painters and obscure sculptors. I was studying engineering, my world more about formulas and tangible structures. We were an unlikely pair, the dreamer and the pragmatist. But it worked. She drew me out of my shell, introduced me to a world of beauty and emotion I hadn't known existed. I, in turn, grounded her, helped her navigate the more practical aspects of life. We dated for 5 years, a slow, steady progression of love and companionship. Our friends called us an old married couple even before we were engaged. Marriage felt like the natural next step, a cementing of what we already had. The wedding was beautiful, a small affair in a botanical garden, Isabella looking radiant. She cried when I said my vows, and I remember feeling like the luckiest man alive, like I had this intricate, precious thing in my hands that I would protect forever. We bought a house in a quiet suburb, a fixer-upper that we poured our weekends into, sanding floors and painting walls, dreaming of the family we would build within them. The topic of children came up organically. We both wanted them. Or at least, I thought we both did with the same uncomplicated enthusiasm. Looking back, maybe there were signs. Her initial hesitation when I first brought up trying, masked quickly with a smile and an of course, honey, when the time is right. The way she'd changed the subject when our friends cooed over their newborns. But I dismissed them. Love does that, doesn't it? It makes you see what you want to see. When she finally told me she was pregnant, about 2 years into our marriage, I was over the moon. I remember lifting her up, spinning her around in the kitchen, both of us laughing, tears in my eyes. It felt like the culmination of everything we'd worked for, everything we were. Her pregnancy was, for the most part, smooth. I went at every appointment, marveled at the blurry ultrasound images, felt the first tiny flutters of kicks against my palm pressed to her belly. I read all the books, assembled the crib with painstaking care, painted that nursery, chose those fluffy sheep. Isabella seemed happy too, though sometimes a little distant. I chalked it up to hormones, the overwhelming nature of impending motherhood. She had a new group of friends from her prenatal yoga class, and she started spending more time with them. Mommy bonding, she called it. I encouraged it. I thought it was healthy. I wanted her to have a support system. How could I have been so blind? The name, Leo, was her choice. She said she'd always loved it. I agreed. It was a strong name. Leo Maxwell Johnson. Our son. Or so I believed with every fiber of my being. The birth itself was long, arduous. I was there, holding her hand, whispering encouragements, a useless but hopefully comforting presence. And then he was here, that first cry filling the room, a sound that was supposed to signify pure joy. And it did, for a while. He was tiny, wrinkled, perfect. I cried. Isabella cried. We were a family. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and the constant, overwhelming smell of baby powder and sour milk. I took paternity leave, eager to share the load, to bond with my son. Isabella was different. Exhausted, yes, we both were. But there was an edge to her, a defensiveness that surfaced at odd moments. If I commented on how little Leo seemed to settle better for her, she'd snap that I wasn't trying hard enough. If I suggested a different way to hold him, I was undermining her maternal instincts. And then there were his looks. My mother, bless her tactless heart, was the first to voice it, albeit subtly. He's got such vibrant hair, doesn't he? She'd said, peering into the bassinet during her first visit. None of our Johnsons ever had hair quite like that. Or those bright blue eyes. Reminds me of, well, never mind, he's a beautiful baby. I'd laughed it off at the time. Babies change, their features evolve. My grandfather had blue eyes, didn't he? No, he didn't. They were a murky green, but in my desperate attempt to find a connection, I'd clung to any flimsy possibility. As Leo grew, week by week, his features became more defined, and the disconnect became more glaring. My family is a blend of English and Italian heritage. Dark hair, olive skin, brown or hazel eyes are the norm. Isabella is of Scandinavian descent, blonde, fair-skinned, with light blue eyes herself, but her family's blues were a softer, grayer shade, not this almost electric sapphire that stared back at me from my son's face. And the red hair. Where on earth did the red hair come from? Neither of our mailmen had red hair, before you ask. It wasn't just one thing, it was the combination. He looked like neither of us, but more pointedly, he looked nothing like me or anyone in my lineage. The questions started as whispers in the back of my mind, quickly shushed. It felt like a betrayal to even think them. This was my son, my wife, our family. To doubt that was to doubt everything. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, especially in the quiet, lonely hours of the night when I'd sit by his crib, just watching him breathe. I started looking at old photos of myself as a baby, of my father, my brothers, searching for any resemblance, any shared trait. There was none. And when I finally, gently, voiced my observations to Isabella, suggesting maybe we should talk about recessive genes or something, just to understand, that's when she hit me with it. Controlling. That one word was designed to shut me down, to make me the bad guy. And for a little while, it almost worked. Almost. But the image of Leo's face, so foreign, so heartbreakingly alien to me, was seared into my mind. The doubt had taken root, and it was growing, poisoning the very foundations of my world. The atmosphere in our home became thick with unspoken tension. Isabella alternated between overly affectionate, as if trying to smother my doubts with exaggerated love, and icily distant, treating my presence as an unwelcome intrusion. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. I tried to bring it up again, more carefully this time. Isabella, honey, I'm not trying to accuse you of anything. I'm just confused. Don't you think he looks a little, well, different from what we might have expected? She was feeding Leo, or trying to. He was fussing, turning his head away from the bottle. Her knuckles were white as she gripped it. Mark, we've been over this, she said, her voice tight. Babies look like babies. My great-aunt Astrid had reddish hair as a child, and blue eyes run in my family. You're fixating on this, and it's unhealthy. It's not fair to Leo, and it's not fair to me. Great-aunt Astrid. That was a new one. A convenient, unverifiable ancestor from across the seas. The excuses were becoming more elaborate, more desperate. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. It would have been so much easier. But my gut, that primal instinct that had been screaming at me for weeks, wouldn't let it go. I started noticing other things. Her phone, which used to lie casually on the nightstand or the coffee table, was now always with her, screen down, often silenced. She'd take calls in the other room, her voice hushed. When I asked who it was always just one of the girls from yoga or my mom. But there was a furtiveness about her that hadn't been there before. She was often tired, but not always the bone-deep exhaustion of a new mother. Sometimes it was a jittery, nervous energy. The late-night feedings became my solitary vigils. Isabella would claim she was too exhausted, that I needed to step up. I didn't mind, not really. Those quiet hours with Leo were a strange mix of love and anguish. I'd hold him, this beautiful, tiny boy who I desperately wanted to be mine, and I'd study his face, looking for any sign, any flicker of me. There was nothing. Just the vibrant blue eyes and the halo of red hair that seemed to mock my Johnson lineage. The thought of a DNA test started to form, a terrifying, illicit idea. It felt like a betrayal in itself, a step into a darkness from which there might be no return. But what was the alternative? To live with this gnawing uncertainty forever? To look at this child every day and wonder? To let her controlling accusation silence a truth that was clawing its way to the surface? The word controlling was a shield she was using, and I was beginning to see it for what it was, a desperate attempt to hide a terrible truth. The foundations of my marriage, of my life as I knew it, were crumbling, and I had a sickening feeling that the worst was yet to come. The decision to get a DNA test wasn't made lightly. It felt like I was planting a bomb under my own life, unsure if it would diffuse harmlessly or detonate and obliterate everything. For weeks, I wrestled with it. I'd look at Leo, sleeping so soundly, his little chest rising and falling, and a wave of tenderness would wash over me. He was innocent in all of this, a perfect little being. Could I really introduce such a cataclysmic uncertainty into his life, into ours, based on a suspicion, a gut feeling, the color of his hair and eyes? Then I'd remember Isabella's defensiveness, her increasingly flimsy explanations, the subtle but significant changes in her behavior. The secrecy with her phone, the hushed conversations, the way she avoided my gaze when I tried to talk about Leo's appearance. It wasn't just about his looks anymore. It was about the erosion of trust, the feeling that I was being played for a fool in my own home. The word controlling still stung, but now it felt less like an accurate accusation and more like a weaponized deflection. She wanted me to doubt my own sanity, to accept her narrative without question. But the engineer in me, the part that relies on facts and evidence, couldn't let it go. I needed data. I needed the truth, whatever it might be. I started researching online, late at night, after Isabella was asleep, the glow of my laptop screen the only light in the darkened living room. At-home paternity tests, discrete DNA testing, legal implications of paternity fraud. The search terms themselves felt sordid, a betrayal of the vows I'd made. The websites promised confidentiality, easy-to-use kits, and accurate results. It seemed so clinical, so straightforward, yet the emotional weight of it was crushing. Ordering the kit was the hardest click I've ever made. It arrived a few days later in a plain, unassuming package, which I quickly hid in my office closet, buried beneath old textbooks and forgotten projects. For another week, it sat there, a silent, accusing presence. Every time I opened that closet, I felt its pull. Was I really going to do this? The opportunity came on a Saturday. Isabella announced she was going out for a long lunch and then some shopping with the girls from yoga. She'd be gone for most of the afternoon. "You'll be okay with Leo, right?" she asked, a little too brightly. "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "We'll have some father-son bonding time." The irony wasn't lost on me. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, my heart started hammering against my ribs. Leo was napping. The house was quiet, too quiet. I retrieved the kit from its hiding place. My hands were trembling as I opened it. Cheek swabs. Simple plastic sticks that held the potential to confirm my deepest fears or alleviate them entirely. Following the instructions, I gently swabbed the inside of Leo's cheek as he slept. He stirred a little but didn't wake. His innocent, trusting face was a fresh stab of guilt. Then, I swabbed my own. The process took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Sealing the samples into the prepaid envelope felt so final. I drove to a post office in the next town, not wanting to use our local one, a ridiculous precaution born of paranoia. Dropping that envelope into the mailbox was like launching a missile targeted at my own life. There was no going back now. The waiting period was agonizing. The testing company said it would take 5 to 7 business days. Every morning, I woke up with a knot of dread in my stomach. Every email notification, every phone call, made me jump. I tried to act normally around Isabella, but it was a Herculean effort. How do you make small talk, discuss grocery lists, or pretend to be interested in her day when your entire world is hanging by a thread? She seemed oblivious, or perhaps she was just relieved that I'd stopped asking questions about Leo. Leo. She was more relaxed, humming as she moved around the house, spending hours on video calls, laughing with her yoga friends. The contrast between her apparent ease and my internal turmoil was almost unbearable. I found myself watching Leo constantly, not with the cloud of suspicion, but with a profound sadness. If he wasn't mine, what then? Would I still love him? Could I? He was just a baby. None of this was his fault. He smiled at me, gurgled, reached out with his tiny fists. Each innocent gesture felt like a twist of the knife. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 7 business days after I'd mailed the samples. The subject line was innocuous. Your test results are ready. I was at work, sitting at my desk, surrounded by colleagues. My office suddenly felt claustrophobic. I could barely breathe. I clicked open the email. There was a link to a secure portal and a password. My fingers fumbled on the keyboard as I typed it in. A PDF document loaded. It was stark, clinical, black and white. Words and numbers. Probabilities. I scrolled down, my eyes searching for the bottom line, the conclusion. And then I saw it. Probability of paternity, 0%. 0. Not 0.1%. Not unlikely. 0. Categorical. Absolute. The air rushed out of my lungs. For a moment, the world went silent. The hum of the office, the distant traffic, the clicking of keyboards, it all vanished. There was only the stark white of the screen and those 2 words, 0%. He wasn't mine. Leo, the baby I had held, rocked, and dreamed of a future with, was not my son. The initial shock was like a physical blow, leaving me winded, disoriented. Then came the cold, creeping numbness, quickly followed by a white-hot rage that surged through me, so potent it made my vision blur. Isabella, my wife, she had lied to me. Not just lied, but orchestrated a monumental deception, allowed me to bond with this child, to invest my love, my future, my very identity as a father, all based on a lie. The controlling comment now seemed like a cruel joke. She wasn't just deflecting. She was gaslighting me, making me question my sanity while she harbored this devastating secret. Every shared smile, every seemingly tender moment during her pregnancy, every reassurance she'd given me, it all replayed in my mind, now tainted, twisted into a grotesque charade. The fluffy sheep in the nursery, the pale yellow walls, the name Leo, her choice. It all felt like a carefully constructed stage for her elaborate play, and I had been the unsuspecting fool. My son. He wasn't my son. The words repeated, a torturous refrain. The betrayal was absolute, a chasm that had just opened up beneath my feet, swallowing everything I thought was real, The drive home from work was a blur. I don't remember much of it, just gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, the 0% flashing in my mind like a broken neon sign. How could she do this? How could anyone be capable of such profound, calculated cruelty? The rage was still there, a boiling cauldron in my chest, but beneath it, a deep, aching sorrow began to seep in. The life I thought I had, the family I thought we were building, it was all a lie, a meticulously crafted illusion. When I walked into the house, Isabella was in the living room, cooing at Leo, who was lying on his playmat. She looked up, smiled. "Hi, honey. Rough day." Her casual, unsuspecting cheerfulness was like a match to a fuse. I didn't say anything. I just walked over to my briefcase, pulled out the printed copy of the DNA report I'd made before leaving the office, and threw it on the coffee table in front of her. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion, then dawning horror as she picked it up and her eyes scanned the page. The color drained from her face. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating, broken only by Leo's happy gurgles, oblivious to the earthquake tearing his world, our world, apart. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The mask was gone. There was no more deflection, no more accusations of me being controlling. There was only the stark, undeniable truth in black and white. "Mark," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't." I cut her off, my own voice dangerously calm, a stark contrast to the inferno raging inside me. "Don't say a word." The betrayal wasn't just about the paternity. It was about the months, years of lies. It was about her looking me in the eye, day after day, while carrying another man's child, my child in every way that mattered emotionally until that piece of paper declared otherwise. The shock was morphing into a chilling clarity. My wife was a stranger. The woman I loved didn't exist. The confrontation was ugly. As soon as Isabella fully processed the DNA report, the initial shock gave way to a torrent of tears, denials, and then, finally, a partial, twisted confession. "It only happened once," she sobbed, clutching a cushion to her chest as if it could shield her. "I was lonely. You were working so much. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. A mistake." She called 9 months of deception, the birth of a child, a mistake. The rage I'd been trying to suppress erupted. "Once," I yelled, my voice cracking. "Once. Do you think I'm a complete idiot, Isabella? Babies don't just happen from once and a wish." "Who is he?" She flinched, tears streaming down her face. "It doesn't matter who he is. He's nobody." It meant nothing. Nothing. The father of the child she had passed off as mine meant nothing. The disrespect, the sheer audacity of her words, was staggering. Leo had started crying, disturbed by the shouting. Isabella moved to pick him up, but I stepped in front of her. "Don't you dare use him as a shield right now," I said, my voice low and menacing. The fight, if you could call it that, lasted for hours. Or maybe it was just me shouting questions and her offering pathetic, self-serving excuses. She claimed it was a brief lapse in judgment, a moment of weakness with someone she barely knew. She swore it was over, that she loved me, that we could get past this. Get past this. How do you get past your wife having another man's child and lying to you about it for nearly a year? How do you get past the fact that every dream you had for your family was built on a foundation of deceit? The emotional toll was immediate and devastating. I felt like I'd been hollowed out, a shell of the man I was just hours before. Sleep was impossible. I spent that first night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our life together, searching for clues I'd missed, for the point where it all went wrong. Was any of it real? Her love for me, her joy at our wedding, her excitement about the pregnancy, was it all an act? The pain was a physical ache in my chest, a constant pressure that made it hard to breathe. The next morning, the house felt like a war zone. Isabella's eyes were red and swollen. She tried to approach me, to talk, but I couldn't bear to look at her, let alone listen to more lies. I packed a bag. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Away from you," I said. "I need to think." I ended up at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and threadbare carpets. It matched how I felt inside. Broken, discarded. The practical aftermath began to set in. What did this mean for us? For Leo? He wasn't mine biologically, but I had been his father for 2 months. I had changed his diapers, fed him, sung him to sleep. Could I just walk away from him? The law, I vaguely knew, was complicated. If I was on the birth certificate, I had rights and responsibilities. But my name on that certificate was a product of her fraud. The anger would come in waves, hot and furious, followed by crushing despair. I thought about my family, our friends. How could I tell them? The shame was immense, even though I was the victim. I felt like a failure, a cuckold, a fool. Isabella kept calling, texting, begging me to come home, to talk. For Leo's sake, she'd plead. It was always about Leo. But which Leo? The one I thought was my son, or the one who was living proof of her betrayal? I started to realize that her controlling accusation wasn't just a defense. It was a calculated tactic to make me feel guilty for even questioning her, to keep her secret buried. The depth of her manipulation was chilling. I knew I couldn't stay in that motel forever. I needed a plan. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She wasn't going to get away with this. She wasn't going to destroy my life and then play the victim. The pain was still there, a raw, open wound, but now, a new emotion was starting to surface, a burning desire for justice. The days that followed were a descent into a personal hell I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Though Isabella was rapidly climbing that list. The cheap motel room became my solitary confinement cell, the silence broken only by the hum of the ancient air conditioner and the relentless replays of Isabella's betrayal in my mind. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. When I did drift off, nightmares of her laughing with a faceless man, or Leo calling another man "daddy," would jolt me awake, drenched in a cold sweat. My appetite vanished. Food tasted like ash. I lost weight, the physical manifestation of the hollowing out I felt inside. My work suffered. I called in sick for a few days, claiming a sudden flu, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. When I did return, I was a ghost, going through the motions, my colleagues casting concerned glances when they thought I wasn't looking. The carefully constructed facade of my life had been shattered, and I was left picking through the jagged pieces, trying to make sense of a reality that felt alien and hostile. The anger, which had initially been a wild, directionless inferno, began to coalesce into something colder, sharper. It was no longer just about the pain of betrayal. It was about the calculated cruelty, the months of sustained deception. She had looked me in the eye every single day, shared my bed, accepted my love and support, all while knowing the child she carried, the child she presented to me as ours, was another man's. The audacity was breathtaking. Her pleas continued, voicemails filled with tearful apologies, texts begging me to reconsider, to think of our family. Each message felt like another twist of the knife. Our family? There was no our family anymore. She had destroyed that with her choices. The irony was, I was thinking of Leo, this innocent child caught in the wreckage of his mother's deceit. What future did he have if it was built on such a rotten foundation? I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I couldn't just forgive and forget. This wasn't a simple mistake, a momentary lapse of judgment. This was a profound violation of trust, a betrayal of vows, a theft of my emotional and financial investment, a fraud perpetrated against me and, in a way, against Leo himself. The desire for justice, for some form of reckoning, began to solidify. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense of causing her equal pain, because how could I quantify the pain she'd inflicted? It was about accountability. It was about ensuring she didn't simply walk away from the devastation she'd caused, perhaps to repeat the pattern with someone else. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. My first practical step was to consult a lawyer. I found a reputable family law attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, whose online reviews praised her toughness and strategic thinking. Sitting in her plush office, recounting my story, felt like another layer of shame being peeled away, but also the first step towards taking back control, real control, not the manipulative accusation Isabella had thrown at me. I laid out the facts: the marriage, the pregnancy, my growing suspicions, the DNA test, the confrontation. Ms. Albright listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice calm but firm, "you are, unfortunately, not the first man to walk into my office with a story like this. Paternity fraud is a deeply damaging act, and we need to approach this strategically." Strategically. I liked the sound of that. She explained the legal landscape. Since my name was on the birth certificate and we were married, I was presumed to be the legal father, with all the accompanying rights and responsibilities, including child support, even if I wasn't the biological father. The DNA test I had taken, while personally conclusive, might need to be followed up with a court-ordered one to be legally binding for disestablishing paternity. "Our first goal," she said, "is to protect your assets and ensure you are not financially burdened for a child that is not biologically yours, especially given the fraud involved. Second, we need to address the divorce. And third, though this is more personal, is how you want to handle the emotional fallout and the revelation of this truth." We discussed options. She advised me to gather any evidence I had of Isabella's infidelity: phone records, emails, social media activity, anything that might point to the affair and its duration. This could be crucial in divorce proceedings, especially concerning any dissipation of marital assets if she'd been spending money on her lover. The thought of sifting through Isabella's digital life felt repulsive, another violation, but Ms. Albright was clear. In situations like this, sentimentality is a luxury you can't afford. You need to protect yourself. The conversation then turned to Leo. "What do you want your relationship with the child to be, if any, moving forward?" Ms. Albright asked. That was the hardest question. He wasn't mine, but I had held him, cared for him. Was it possible to just sever that connection? Yet, how could I raise another man's child, a living testament to my wife's betrayal, every day? I didn't have an answer then. My immediate priority was to untangle myself from Isabella's web of lies. The idea of revenge began to take a more concrete shape in my mind. It wasn't about public shaming, necessarily, though the thought of exposing her deceit to our friends and family held a certain appeal. It was more about ensuring that she faced the full consequences of her actions, legally and personally. She had gambled with my life, my emotions, and our future, all for her selfish desires. Now it was time for her to pay the price. I decided I needed to find out who the biological father was. Not out of jealousy, but for practical reasons. He had a responsibility, a financial one at the very least. And perhaps, just perhaps, knowing who he was would provide some closure, some understanding of how this had all happened. My plan began to form, layer by layer: secure legal protection, gather evidence, identify the biological father, and then confront Isabella not with rage, but with irrefutable facts and a clear path to dissolving our marriage on terms that reflected her culpability. The fight was just beginning, but for the first time since seeing that 0%, I felt a flicker of something other than pain, determination. The task of gathering evidence was as soul-crushing as I'd anticipated. It felt like being a detective in my own life, sifting through the debris of a relationship I'd once cherished, now looking for proof of its rotten core. Ms. Albright had been clear: the more evidence of deception and infidelity, the stronger our position, particularly in ensuring a fair division of assets and demonstrating the extent of the fraud. Isabella, in her tearful voicemails, kept insisting it was a one-time mistake, a narrative I knew was false given the calculated nature of her lies about Leo's paternity. Proving a longer affair would dismantle that defense entirely. I started with her phone records, which, as her husband, I had access to through our family plan. It was a painstaking process, cross-referencing numbers she'd called or texted frequently around the suspected time of conception. One number stood out, appearing with increasing regularity in the months leading up to her announcing her pregnancy, and then continuing, albeit less frequently, afterwards. There were late-night calls, long conversations. I didn't recognize the number. My next step, and this felt like a particularly grimy invasion of privacy even though she had invaded my entire life, was to access our shared cloud account where photos and backups were stored. Isabella wasn't particularly tech-savvy and probably assumed I never looked there. Buried in a miscellaneously named folder, I found them, a collection of photos, not many, but enough. Selfies of her with a man I vaguely recognized. He was taller than me, with sandy blonde hair and, yes, striking blue eyes. A couple of the photos were a bit too cozy for just friends. My blood ran cold. I did recognize him. He was part of her prenatal yoga group's extended social circle, someone she'd introduced me to fleetingly at a barbecue the previous summer as Liam, a friend of Sarah's. She'd barely mentioned him otherwise. Liam. The name felt like a brand on my brain. Comparing the dates of the photos with the timeline of her pregnancy, it all started to click into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a random, one-time mistake. This had been an ongoing involvement. The pieces were assembling themselves into a sickening mosaic of betrayal. Liam. He looked nothing like me, but he did share certain features with Leo. The fair hair, though his was more sandy blonde than fiery red, and those distinctive blue eyes. The red hair was still a bit of a mystery, perhaps a recessive gene from his side, or maybe Isabella's mysterious great aunt Astrid actually did exist and possessed a stray crimson strand. The confirmation of the affair partner, Liam, solidified my resolve. Ms. Albright was pleased, in a grim, professional way, with the evidence. This strengthens our case significantly, she'd said. It shows a pattern of deception. We began to formulate the divorce petition, focusing on irretrievable breakdown due to adultery and fraud. The strategy was to hit Isabella with the full weight of the evidence at once, leaving her little room to maneuver or play the victim. While Ms. Albright handled the legal filings, I wrestled with the personal side of this impending confrontation. How would I tell my family? Our friends? The thought of their pity, their shock, was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. For now, I decided to keep the circle of knowledge small. Just my lawyer and, soon, Isabella. The element of surprise would be crucial in the next phase. I also had to consider Leo. He was, in the eyes of the law for the moment, my son. Disestablishing paternity was a legal process, and until that was complete, I had obligations. But emotionally, the bond was fractured, tainted. Every time I imagined his future, it was now inextricably linked with Liam, this stranger who had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, fathered him. The thought of co-parenting, even temporarily, with Isabella while this shadow loomed was unbearable. The plan was multi-pronged. First, Ms. Albright would formally serve Isabella with the divorce papers, which would include a motion to compel a court-ordered DNA test for both Leo and Liam if we could locate him and establish grounds. The evidence of the affair would be laid out. Second, I needed to confront Isabella directly, not to relitigate the pain, but to inform her of my intentions and to make it clear that I knew everything, or at least enough to dismantle her web of lies. The revenge here wasn't about screaming or public humiliation, though a part of me still craved that. It was about a quiet, decisive dismantling of her deceitful world. It was about her understanding that her actions had profound, irreversible consequences. It was about ensuring that Liam, the biological father, would be forced to acknowledge his child and take responsibility, freeing me from a fraudulent obligation. The day Ms. Albright filed the papers, a strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a general before a battle they knew was inevitable and for which they were fully prepared. I arranged to meet Isabella at the house. I needed to be there when she was served, to see her face, to ensure she understood the gravity of the situation. I had moved most of my essential belongings out already, creating a sterile, impersonal feel in what was once her home. She arrived looking wary, probably expecting another emotional plea from me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of documents in front of me, copies of the divorce filing, the DNA report, printouts of the photos of her and Liam. Just as she started to speak, the doorbell rang. It was the process server. Ms. Albright had timed it perfectly. Isabella's confusion turned to shock as she was handed the legal documents. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling as she read through the petition. Her eyes darted from the legal jargon to the attached exhibits, the photos, the summary of phone records. The color drained from her face again, just as it had when she first saw my DNA report. But this time, there were no tears, no immediate denials. Just a stunned, horrified silence. "You found out about Liam," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. It wasn't a question. "I found out about everything, Isabella," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the rage that had consumed me for weeks. The lies, the affair, the calculated decision to pass his child off as mine. It's all there. I gestured to the papers. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours. We're petitioning for a court-ordered DNA test for Liam as well. He needs to take responsibility for his son." Her head snapped up at that. "You can't involve him. He doesn't want to be involved. That's not really your decision to make anymore, is it?" I replied, the coldness in my own voice surprising even me. "And it's certainly not mine to protect him from the consequences of his actions with my wife." The fight seemed to drain out of her. She looked defeated, small. The architect of this grand deception was now facing the meticulously planned demolition of her lies. There was no satisfaction in seeing her crumble, not really. Just a grim sense of necessity. This was the only way forward, the only way to reclaim my life and ensure justice, not just for me, but for the truth itself. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of the kitchen clock, each tick sounding like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. The weeks following the serving of the divorce papers were a blur of legal maneuvering and simmering tension. Isabella, through her newly hired lawyer, initially tried to contest certain aspects, particularly the immediate push for Liam's DNA test and the fraud allegations. Her defense was weak, relying on portraying herself as a remorseful woman who made a mistake and was now being ruthlessly pursued by a vengeful husband. It was a narrative that Ms. Albright systematically dismantled with the evidence we had meticulously gathered. The photos, the phone records, the timeline of the affair, it all painted a clear picture of deliberate, sustained deception, not a momentary lapse. The court quickly granted the motion for a court-ordered DNA test for Leo, naming both me and Liam as potential fathers. Locating Liam proved easier than I'd anticipated. Turns out, he wasn't some shadowy figure but a local architect, relatively well-known in certain circles, and, as I discovered through some discreet inquiries, married himself. The plot thickened. Not only had Isabella betrayed me, but she'd also been involved with a married man. The hypocrisy was astounding. Liam, when contacted by Ms. Albright's office and subsequently served with the order to submit to DNA testing, was reportedly shocked and then furious, not at his own actions, but at being dragged into the spotlight. His attempts to evade the test were short-lived. The legal pressure was too strong. The day we all convened at the lab for the court-ordered DNA collection was surreal. I was there, Isabella was there, pale and avoiding eye contact with everyone, and Liam was there, looking like a man who'd just had his carefully curated life explode in his face. He shot daggers at Isabella, then at me. I met his gaze evenly. He was a component of this disaster, not the sole architect, but a willing participant. The actual swabbing was clinical, impersonal, over in minutes, but the underlying drama was palpable. Two men, one woman, and a child whose paternity was about to be legally and irrevocably decided. The waiting period for these results felt different. The initial raw shock of my own discovery had passed. Now, it was about legal confirmation, about the next steps in untangling this mess. The results, when they came, were no surprise to me. Liam was confirmed as Leo's biological father with a 99.99% probability. My probability, of course, remained 0%. Seeing it on official court order documentation was a strange form of vindication. It wasn't just my private, painful discovery anymore. It was a legally recognized fact. With paternity definitively established, the divorce proceedings moved forward with a new momentum. Isabella's attempts to claim significant spousal support or a disproportionate share of marital assets were severely undermined by the proven adultery and fraud. Ms. Albright argued forcefully that Isabella had entered into the marriage and perpetuated it under false pretenses, particularly concerning the paternity of the child, which constituted a serious breach of trust and good faith. The judge, a stern, experienced woman, seemed to agree. The revenge I had sought was not a dramatic, public shaming, though the truth did eventually filter out to our respective social circles, causing its own ripples. Isabella's yoga friends suddenly became distant. Liam's own marriage, I later heard, was in tatters. My revenge was quieter, more personal, and ultimately more satisfying. It was in the legal dismantling of her deceit. It was in the court order that officially removed my name from Leo's birth certificate and had Liam's name rightfully added. It was in the financial settlement that heavily favored me, recognizing the emotional distress and financial implications of her fraud. She wasn't left destitute. Ms. Albright and I weren't aiming for cruelty, but she certainly didn't profit from her deception. She had to sell the house we had once shared, the home I had poured my heart into, to cover her legal fees and find a new place to live. Liam, now legally recognized as Leo's father, was ordered to pay child support. His life, too, had been irrevocably altered. He was forced to confront the consequences of his actions, to take responsibility for the child he had fathered. There was a certain justice in that. The confrontation I had with Isabella, after the main legal battles were over, was quiet. We met in Ms. Albright's conference room to sign some final papers. She looked tired, worn down. The arrogance and defensiveness were gone. "Mark," she said, her voice soft, "I truly am sorry. For everything." I looked at her, the woman I had once loved, the mother of a child I had briefly, mistakenly, called my son. Was her apology genuine? Maybe. Maybe not. It didn't really matter anymore. "I hope you can find a way to build an honest life for yourself, Isabella," I said. "And for Leo. He deserves that much." There was nothing more to say. I signed the papers, stood up, and walked out without looking back. The sense of relief was immense, like a physical weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't joy, not exactly. The scars were still there, and probably always would be. But it was a profound sense of closure. The lies had been exposed, accountability had been enforced, and I was free. Free to start rebuilding my life, a life based on truth, a life I could finally call my own again. The fluffy sheep mobile still spun in my memories, but now it was just a reminder of a chapter closed, a painful lesson learned. Looking back, the year following the finalization of the divorce was one of slow, arduous healing. The rage and the acute pain eventually subsided, leaving behind a dull ache, a scar tissue around my heart that reminded me of what I'd been through. Life was different, quieter. The house felt empty for a while, even after Isabella's things were gone. But gradually, I began to reclaim the space, to make it my own again. I repainted the nursery, turning it into a home office. The pale yellow, once a symbol of shattered dreams, became a calm, neutral beige. Each stroke of the roller felt like an act of reclaiming my peace, my future. I learned a lot about myself during that time. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, more resilient. I learned the importance of trusting my gut, even when someone tries to convince you that you're imagining things, that you're being controlling for daring to question the narrative they're spinning. That word, controlling, had been her weapon, her shield. Now, I saw it for what it was, the desperate cry of a manipulator caught in their own web. The betrayal forced me to reevaluate everything I believed about love and trust. It would be easy to become cynical, to close myself off from future relationships. And for a time, I did. The thought of being vulnerable with someone again was terrifying. But slowly, with the help of a good therapist and the unwavering support of my true friends and family, those who stood by me when the sordid details emerged, I began to see that Isabella's actions were a reflection of her character, not a judgment on my worthiness of love or my ability to trust. She was broken, not me. The experience didn't make me bitter, but it did make me more cautious, more observant. I learned to look for consistency between words and actions, to value honesty and integrity above all else. What about Leo? That's the question many people ask. Legally, he is Liam's son. I have no rights, no obligations. Emotionally, it's complex. For 2 intense months, he was, in my heart, my child. That bond, however fraudulently established, doesn't just vanish overnight. I don't see him. Isabella and Liam eventually worked out some co-parenting arrangement, I believe. Occasionally, I hear snippets about him through mutual acquaintances. I hope he's happy. I hope he's loved. He is, and always will be, an innocent in all of this. My anger was never directed at him. If anything, I feel a profound sadness for the complicated start he's had in life, born of such deceit. Perhaps one day, when he's much older, he'll learn the full story, and I hope he understands that my actions were about seeking truth and justice, not about rejecting him. The revenge I achieved wasn't about inflicting pain, but about restoring balance, about ensuring accountability. Seeing Isabella face the legal and social consequences of her choices, seeing Liam forced to step up, that was the justice. It wasn't about a dramatic explosion, but a steady, methodical dismantling of a fraudulent reality. It allowed me to close that chapter with a sense of integrity, knowing I had faced the ugliest of truths and had not backed down. My life now is peaceful. I've reconnected with old hobbies, invested more time in my career, and slowly, cautiously, started to entertain the idea of dating again. The world looks different. I'm more attuned to the nuances of human behavior, less naive perhaps, but not entirely jaded. I learned that trust, once shattered, is incredibly hard to rebuild, and sometimes it's not meant to be. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away and build something new on a foundation of your own truth. The pain of betrayal fades, but the lessons remain. And those lessons, ultimately, have made me a wiser, more discerning, and perhaps a more compassionate man, if only to myself for surviving it all. Looking back, I realize I lost a part of myself, but I also found something stronger. If you've ever been betrayed, know this: you're not alone, and healing is possible. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories like this one. Until next time, take care of yourself.